Morning everybody. I am at the PRI show, which is Performance Racing Industry, and PRI is the largest gathering of racers, engine builders, and performance manufacturers you're going to find anywhere in the world, and it only happens once a year. The coolest thing about this for me is they have some ridiculously awesome engines. So I'm going to check out a few of them here. I want to show them to you before the crowds get too bad, and let's go.
First up is this incredible 16-cylinder engine from a new company called 16 Power Performance, and it was a showstopper. The engine is based on LS engine architecture. You can see that it uses 4 LS3 rectangular port cylinder heads, but the block is one single casting. 16 says this engine produces up to 900 horsepower in naturally aspirated form, but 1,600 with superchargers, which you can see in this setup, and an astounding 2,200 horsepower with a quad turbo setup. One of the many cool factors of this build is how they've managed to bolt up 2 Magnuson V8 superchargers on top of an intercooler for a very compact package, all considering we're talking about 2 V8s worth of cylinders. Notice the trick setup driving the superchargers from the center of the engine. Here, you can see the jack shaft driven by a slip-proof cogged belt settled in between the intake manifold's runners. Besides the cool factor, the advantage of a 16-cylinder engine is you can produce big power without stressing individual components as much. For example, the load is spread across 16 pistons and connecting rods instead of the usual 8. Currently, 16 Power Performance is designing and building these engines for marine applications. You can see the drive unit on the back of the engine here. But we bet it's only a matter of time before some enterprising builders start stuffing them in all manner of hot rods. And we can't wait to see it. Next up, and these are in no particular order, is Proline Racing's new raised cam hemi. This beast is an all-billet creation with the cam raised 650 thousandths of an inch for more stroke and better valve train stability. Proline even has their own rocker arm assemblies just for this engine. You can run it turbocharged, but this particular bad boy was in the ProCharger booth, so it had one of ProCharger's massive F3X 13.5-inch superchargers. As you can see, the supercharger is driven off the crankshaft, and there's also a massive blow-off valve to handle the 60 pounds of boost that it can create. That pushes air through dual throttle bodies into a gorgeous billet intake manifold with computer-controlled port fuel injection. Check out the size of the air-motive fuel pump used to push fuel to the injectors. That's probably necessary because this particular engine is almost certainly set to burn methanol. This engine is designed to run in the NHRA Pro Mod class, as well as several other classes like No Prep and Outlaw 10.5, and it's already seen lots of success. In fact, it's already won the PDRA Boost Championship and currently owns the record as the quickest car in the 8th mile at 3.587 seconds at 206 miles an hour. Wagler competition was hidden in the back of the show floor, but they still drew a massive crowd every day with the diesel beast they brought to share. This bad boy is a 460 cubic inch blown diesel tractor pulling engine that's all CNC cut from aluminum and steel. This engine is based around Duramax architecture, but it's been significantly beefed up in every regard. It features mechanical injectors the size of clubs, a giant turbo that's approximately 149 millimeters in size, and the capability to not only handle 180 pounds of boost, but to do it reliably. This is still a developmental piece, but so far they've managed to produce over 3,000 horsepower, and they have a final target of over 4,000. That kind of power produced through diesel creates a ton of heat, so you'll see things not normally found on gasoline engines. Things like machine steel exhaust manifolds, because Wagler found that even heavy-duty wall tubing was deforming. The giant intercooler up front is a one-of-a-kind, full-floating design. The aluminum passages carrying the air charge aren't welded to the water box. Instead, an O-ring design seals everything up while still allowing it to float so it can expand without cracking any welds. But that wasn't the only diesel Wagler had on hand cracking necks. Check out this diesel drag race engine that goes into a rail car. This beast certainly has the drag racing look with the roots mounted blower up top, but that's not the only bullet in the gun. There's also both nitrous for more power and water meth injection to keep the incoming intake charge down. We're told that this setup reliably produces somewhere around 2,000 horsepower on 65 pounds of boost. Number 4 is an all-new sprint car racing engine from Ford Performance. As sprint car racing goes, this engine is fairly traditional, but this is the first time in decades that racers have had a legitimate option from the Blue Oval. If you aren't familiar with sprint car racing, here's a look at the ultra downforce race cars that are powered by these methanol injected race engines. This engine was developed with the help of Tony Stewart Racing and assembled by Andy Durham Racing Engines. It utilizes mechanical fuel injection with individual runners. Ignition is old school with a magneto providing the power. There's no starter bolted up, so the engine can only be started by push starting the car. Sprint car racing puts incredible stress on the engines, and a complete engine swap between the heats and the main event isn't unheard of. To allow this and make things easier, everything is attached to the engine. That big tank you see is the dry sump oil tank. The multi-stage oil pump is where you would normally find the water pump, and the water pump is just below it and powered by the crankshaft. This 410 cubic inch Ford is naturally aspirated, so the compression is cranked way up, all the way to 16:1 in fact. And that helps this engine produce well over 900 horsepower and 700 pound-feet of torque. Hey, it takes a lot of power to spin those massive tires. Truck pulling isn't only the realm of diesel engines. There are also a lot of truck and tractor pullers running gasoline engines, and this beast was built particularly for them. Sunnies Racing built this giant 648 cubic inch engine with their own hemispherical cylinder head design based loosely around GM architecture. Naturally aspirated, it produces 1,640 horsepower and a torque curve that is Everest high and Nebraska flat. In fact, it makes over 1,000 pound-feet of torque from 6,000 RPM all the way up to the 8,500 RPM redline. It achieves that with a fully CNC cut block and cylinder heads. The block also has the cam tunnel raised a full 2 inches to allow greater stroke. Packed inside are a billet crankshaft from Bryant, billet aluminum rods, titanium valves, and tons of other goodies. The oiling is a dry sump system to minimize windage and internal pumping losses. They obviously take that seriously with a 5-stage dry sump oil pump as well as a vacuum pump from Moroso. Just below that vacuum pump is the giant belt-driven fuel pump that's required to feed this beast. Sunnies is one of the few manufacturers to freely share the price of their engines at the show, and this particular power plant goes for over 80 grand new. That's a ton of cash, but with multiple truck pulling championships, it appears that Sunnies has pullers lined up at the door to get one of their own. The recent continuing advancements in CNC machining and computer-aided design have made billet engine components more popular than ever. And Dan Jessel of Jessel Valvetrain has taken full advantage of those capabilities to design an engine completely all his own. This engine, known as the Jessel Equal 8, has no components that will bolt on any Ford, Chevrolet, or Mopar. It's a completely billet engine that will be used in both drag racing and land speed racing. It utilizes an absolutely gigantic clamshell-style cam and a valve train with geometry that is completely straight and in line from pushrod to valve. This naturally aspirated 427 cubic inch engine is still in development, so it's not complete yet, but Jessel says that it has already made 1,198 horsepower on the dyno at a sky-high 9,600 RPM. There's hope for 1,250 horsepower and a redline that exceeds 10 grand. In the near future, you can expect to see the Equal 8 first at Bonneville breaking land speed records, and after that in the NHRA, primarily in the comp eliminator class. Next up is an oddball engine that I couldn't even identify at first. It turns out that it's a custom designed engine from a mad scientist named Eric Edelman and his company Upper Limit Performance and Engineering. With just 3.3 liters in displacement, this flat four can handle tons of boost and is a big performer on the drag strip. I'll let Eric explain it himself.
Hey, this is Eric with Upper Limit. Tell me what you built here, Eric.
Well, it's an opposed four-cylinder. Background is in hay fuel, nitro racing, and top fuel. And I took my design and engineering knowledge from that, and we made a flat four.
Do you call it a Volkswagen, or what do you call it?
I call it a flat four. It's nothing Volkswagen on it. The industry of the flat four, basically the Volkswagen is the head runner of it all. And you have Porsche behind it, then you also have the Subaru industry as well.
All right, so how much power are you getting out of this?
1630 has been recorded. We're hoping for 2000.
How much boost is that?
60-70 pounds. Single turbo.
What kind of car does it run in then?
We have a funny car, and then Volcron is our customer here that will be running this motor as well.
And it's all 100% billet?
It's all billet.
And it's totally your design too?
Our design, yes sir.
Wow. What was the hardest part about coming up with this design?
Affording to buy the equipment to manufacture it. Other than that, it was easy.
How many of these are there in existence?
Well, we have 3 different combinations, so we've got about 7 or 8 out there right now.
Really?
And 3 different styles.
Okay, very cool. So push rod tubes below?
Straight push rod tubes are straight, so we have no angle except for the 4 degrees down.
How much boost do you, how much compression do you run?
On the turbo applications, we're pushing about 9 to 1.
9 to 1. Wow. And how much, say the horsepower again?
1630.
1630. Wow, that's amazing.
We're going for 2000. That's our goal. That's our next little hurdle. You know, from go-kart motors to top fuel cars, you just take a little bit of everything and put it together. That's what I did. Clean sheet of paper, computer, and we sat down and started manufacturing.
This isn't exactly a new engine, and it's one of the first we're showing you that's still in a car, but it is way too cool to pass up. This is the engine that powered Dave Schroeder and his beautiful 1966 Corvette to a surprising overall win in Hot Rod Drag Week in 2017. This engine is an 872 cubic inch monster built by Rear Morrison and running multiple stages of nitrous. Those 2 throttle bodies you see are giants from Nick Williams and measure 102 millimeters in diameter each. Big power is one thing, but surviving drag week with hundreds of low-speed road miles interspersed by all-out drag strip passes is a torture test all its own. To help survive drag week, they used 1.90 to 1 ratio rocker arms for the intakes and 1.85 for the exhaust at the track. And then they swapped in less aggressive 1.60 and 1.55 ratio rocker arms to endure the grueling road miles. Over 3 years later, this car and engine combo is still winning races and drawing crowds. And while we're talking about Hot Rod Drag Week, here's a Steve Morris racing engines design that helped Tom Bailey and his infamous Camaro named 6 Seconds not only win the overall and unlimited class in 2019, but they also set the record for the fastest Hot Rod Drag Week pass ever at 5.99 seconds. Steve Morris calls this a Proline engine, and once again, it is an all-aluminum, fully CNC'd billet monster. Under boost from twin turbos, this engine produces over 4,500 horsepower, yet it's also fully water-jacketed, meaning it can be cooled and handle the 800 miles on public roads that Bailey subjected it to on Drag Week. And here's a look at the actual engine in the race car. He uses a slightly different setup than Morris's display engine, but the basics are still the same. And finally, we'll leave you with an engine we bet you've never seen anything quite like. How about a 2-cylinder with a full crank-driven centrifugal supercharger that makes over 1,000 horsepower? It's actually a test engine from Noonan Race Engines, and we got Noonan's Daryl Maskins to explain it all.
This is our V-twin engine, our 4.9 bore spacing test engine. We developed this engine mainly to do camshaft spintron testing and also for dyno testing. This is the same platform, piston rods, rocker arm, crankshaft, rocker arm ratio as our larger platform over here, our 4.9. But here we can test at around 750, 1,000 horsepower with V-twin. which would be somewhere around 3,500 to 4,000 horsepower on the V8. So
You said 1,000 horsepower two-cylinder.
1,000 horsepower two-cylinder, yes.
God bless America.
Yeah, so we can run this configuration a lot cheaper with only 2 components change out: pistons, rods, combustion chambers, valves. So we can kind of accelerate the progress for our customers, especially in the NHRA development. So we have it set up here with a ProCharger, and we also have a manifold where we can run a small Whipple for testing the supercharged.
So you can run this whole setup on a dyno, the
Yes,
ProCharger.
yes. This engine will, you probably see it, Renee, I have it on Facebook, some dyno pulls, but this early next year we'll have this on the dyno doing some testing.
Hey, thanks for watching. I hope you've enjoyed our tour of the best engines from PRI. If you've enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe so you won't miss out on our upcoming engine features.